For 2 years, 2 long years, the Geo element has been left alone, cold, to be discarded as the runt of the litter. For 2 years, the element has been completely neglected and forgotten about, with almost no hope for being saved. That is, until now. Cue that one meme with Mercy from Overwatch descending from the heavens to save you. That's basically Navia in a nutshell. No, but seriously, to think that it's been close to 2 years since the last Geo unit is kind of absurd to think about, but I suppose miHoYo eventually had to give Geo some attention. At this point, it's an objective fact that Geo is far and away the weakest and least functional element of the 7, owing to its lack of meaningful synergy with the other elements as a result of Crystallize being all but useless on its own, and of course as a result of Geo receiving the least amount of attention in terms of units. With these circumstances working against it, Navia has a lot of things to be responsible for, meaning she could either be the unit that saves Geo or the one who solidifies Geo's position as the worst element in the game. Today we'll be analyzing the Helm of the Radiant Rose's abilities, design, and gameplay to determine which one she will be. In accordance with those who came before her so far in version 4, Fontaine marks a shift in character priorities. Throughout versions 2 and 3, much focus was placed on elemental reactions, rounding out several teams, introducing the 7th element, and fleshing out the roster with a wide range of characters of all types, roles, and functions. In version 4, miHoYo saw fit to give more attention to less explored areas, new niches, and divergent playstyles, so it's appropriate for Navia to have come during this time, as Geo is arguably the most niche and most divergent element in the game. Aspects that have so far served as more of a detriment than a benefit. I'm sure Geo's problems need no explanation for many of you, but I feel like it's important to highlight as it pertains to her gameplay rather closely. With Crystallize being Geo's sole reaction, and a pragmatically bad one at that, Geo is, for all intents and purposes, the same as physical damage but with an element sticker attached to it. Aside from benefiting from elemental damage buffs, there's no real difference between a physical damage dealer and a Geo one. What this implies is that for any Geo character to be successful within the confines of their elements, they can and must rely on nothing but brute force. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, since with enough strength you can overpower everything else, but not having access to reactions in some way, shape, or form, especially in regards to the compatibility with other elements, is a huge handicap to have. For instance, Navia is highly sought after for his extreme damage output both in single target and AoE, and he doesn't particularly care too much about pulling off a certain reaction, vaporize, freeze, hyperbloom, etc. The only incentive to use them is to stack up heir to the Ancient Sea's authority. That being said, the fact that he's a Hydra unit means, no matter how little or insignificant, he does allow for Hydra-based reactions to take effect, which is always a benefit. Likewise for other brute force attackers, even if their kit doesn't explicitly suggest they're supposed to be used for reaction teams, having a modicum of reactability is significant to a degree. Therefore, being Geo, Navia has no compatibility with the other elements beyond Crystallize, which in and of itself offers no bonus DPS whatsoever, as all Crystallize does is grant a small shield when you pick up the shard. For Navia to excel, she needs to have equal, if not better numbers than even the most deflated characters in the game, or she has to introduce her own custom interaction with Crystallize. As the Claymore user, she has a pretty standard set of normal attacks to go with, not really deviating too far in this regard, but she is a normal attacker thanks to her first Ascension passive. For 4 seconds after using her elemental skill, her attacks deal bonus damage and are infused with Geo. Unlike Noelle and Ito, who can only get Geo infusion from their elemental bursts, Navia can do it with a skill, though it is only for 4 seconds, shorter than even Kutzing's infusion of 5. Although this is made up for by having a relatively short 9-second cooldown on her skill, from this we can infer that Navia will most likely serve as a quick swap attacker, someone who rotates in, does a bit of damage, and then gets out before repeating the cycle. She's not a hyper carry in a traditional sense, as hyper carry units generally stay out for upwards of 8 to 10 seconds. For her elemental skill, it's both somewhat sophisticated and rudimentary at the same time. Passively, when your party picks up a shield from Crystallize, Navia gains 1 stack up to 6 at a time. When activating her skill, she does a humongous burst of damage that increases based on the number of stacks she has. Altogether, if she fires while maxed out, she can do an insane amount of upfront damage, especially towards a single target. And when I say a ton of damage, I mean a ton of damage. We're talking thousands of %. This makes Navia's E the most damaging elemental skill in the game by far, contested only by, perhaps, Hazel. Functionally, her skill is very similar to Hazel, where the more stacks you accumulate prior to using it, the more damage it does. Also, like Hazel's Falcon Punch, Navia can hold a skill before using it. While she holds, she can pick up Crystallized shields as well for the same effect. Very simple premise. During battle, you pick up as many shields as you can, then swap to Navia, use your skill, then auto attack for 4 seconds before swapping out and repeating the cycle. So despite only having a 4-second Geo infusion, that's really all she needs. In between recasting your skill, Navia's Geo attacks, followed by swapping to other units, will get you the adequate stacks you need for fast and big damage. It also means you don't have to wait a long time if you accidentally mess up, compared to other units who have 12, 15, 18-second cooldowns. One more thing, though being an elemental skill makes you immediately think she wants to use Golden Troop, bear in mind to get the full 70% boost, the wearer has to be off-field like Yayimiko, Farina, and Fischl. Navia will only get 45%. Conveniently for her though, the new artifact set Nighttime Whispers works famously with her, giving her a boost of geo damage to the tune of 50% after using her skill when affected by a crystallized shield, something she plans to have active at all times anyway. This is good to make note of because Navia doesn't scale off defense, so existing geo artifacts will be of little to no use to her, though if you are resolving to field her as a sub DPS, then I suppose Archaic Petra can work. That's the basic gist of her gameplay. Rotate between her skill, get stacks of the next cast, and repeat the cycle. She's a very easy unit to understand in this regard, which is good to have for a brute force attacker. The more ways the DPS unit can miss timing or fumble their rotation, the more inconsistent and subsequently worse they are. The only thing left to figure out is how to get all those stacks quickly. Easy solution, her burst. For 12 seconds, on a 15-second cooldown, Navia unleashes a barrage of cannon fire in a target area that deals periodic geo damage to nearby enemies. Additionally, alongside the crystallized shards that her burst will inevitably generate, every 2.5 seconds, she gains a stack of her skill when her cannon fires on enemies, for a total of 5 stacks over the 12-second duration. This effectively lowers the number of crystallized shards you need to get from 6 down to 3, as she can passively generate 3 stacks in between cooldowns of your skill. You can imagine Navia's burst as a geo version of Ganye's burst essentially, although it does much less damage, but unlike Celestial Shower, which is mostly for coverage and application, Navia's is to give you a comfortable way to optimize each cast of her skill. That's about it. Very easy character to understand, but she should be. Trying to make a complex character for Geo is the last thing you want to do, since the more complex they are, the harder it can be for them to synergize with other units. It was one of the reasons why I think Mono Geo is struggling so much, with how specific the team is in that it needs certain factors to be met that can have the adverse effect of disqualifying a lot of potential synergy in the future, so I'm kind of glad that Navia is not leaning into Mono Geo. Secondly, I like how they still try to incorporate aspects of Geo into her kit. If not for the crystallized component, I find her kit to be incredibly generic, not in a bad way mind you. If we isolate the crystallized thing for a moment, you can theoretically have Navia be any other element, like she could be a pyro character, a cryo, hydro, etc. In fact, I feel like Navia would have been bonkers if she was pyro, cause imagine doubling her elemental skill damage would melt. But that's a pipe dream for another time. Speaking of her not being a Mono Geo character, that's asserted through her other passive talent, giving a bonus attack for each Pyro, Electro, Cryo, or Hydro party member stacking up to 2 times. So like Nahida and Linny, Navia has a certain team in mind. In this case, you were gonna field any of the 4 companion elements to crystallize anyway, so it works out perfectly. It also doesn't state that they need to be different elements. You could have 2 Cryo, 2 Hydro, 2 Electro, 2 Pyro and such. They don't have to be unique elements. This opens up the door for many different support pairings. Bennett's an obvious good choice, more attack power for more skill and auto attack damage. Fischl's excellent, as their constant electro application can give you tons of crystallize. Interestingly, Navia's short rotation cycle actually makes her compatible with Mona, since the Omen debuff will last long enough for her skill and 4 seconds of attacking afterwards. Yaemiko works too for persistent off-field damage. Let's also not forget Farina, although it might be tougher to use her with Navia since her usual companions, Jean and Baizhu, aren't the most compatible with her. You can still bring them, don't get me wrong, it's just inconvenient that Geo has no synergy with Anemo or Dendro. C2 Farina though solves this issue by maxing out Fanfare stacks almost immediately, but C0 Farina will be tough unless you decide to bring Kokomi on board, which, I mean, you certainly can. In fact, that can work well since if you're on Thrilling Tales on Kokomi, that will bring you a ton of damage for Navia. I haven't done too much theory crafting on Navia since I don't consider myself one, but the main point is that she has a ton of ways to boost her damage output through supports that units like Itol and Noel don't get the same access to. Although in her case, it's mostly because her base damage is so high and not exclusive to just Geo that helps her out. Overall though, like I said, she has a very simple premise to her, but she works very nicely off her own gameplay, making her very team friendly in this regard. An issue with other carry supports is their explicit need for teammates to make up for their own deficiencies. Someone like Yoimiya, for instance, has no way of getting super armor, which is imperative to have on a unit whose source of DPS is derived from the latter half of her normal attack rotation. For Navia, the fact that her ultimate is exactly the kind of thing you need to facilitate her skill makes her a very intuitive character. She's not missing anything, so you don't have to get specific units to support her. You can basically throw in anything that can boost her damage. Bennett, Mona, Farina, another Geo unit for Geo Resonance, a Thrilling Tales support. You can even go Yelan for follow-up damage given that she uses basic attacks. She's a very open-ended character. 2 more things I want to talk about are her weapon and constellations. First and foremost, I freaking love her personal weapon. It's not even a sword, it's an axe. So I guess Mihoyo is just doing anything now, but with Catalyst users punching you to death and now a greatsword user carrying a massive battle axe. I can respect it. Anyways, her Claymore gives attack and crit rate, which is always good for a carry, and for its passive it increases elemental skill damage whenever picking up crystallized shards. So on one hand, it sucks that it's locked to basically just her and can't be splashed onto other characters, but I mean, she's worth the investment. Plus, again, it's a friggin' axe. As for her constellations, taking into account her base kit being so simple, her constellations are also really simple. For instance, Constellation 1 refunds a portion of her skill cooldown to bring it from 9 seconds to 6 for better uptime. This is precisely the type of property Constellation 1 should be, giving a character more uptime or easier access to their max potential. Constellation 2 grants bonus crit rate based on the number of stacks consumed when using her skill, exactly like her C1. And as an extra component, she passively strikes cannon fire from her burst when using her skill on enemies for some extra damage. This really comes down to if you need that extra crit rate. Personally, I don't see much of a reason to go beyond C1. C6 is nice, but at the same time as C6, I don't expect anyone to spend that much on her. C2 is more of a question of consistency. With their main source of damage coming from a single attack, if that single attack fails to crit, you lose out on a ton of DPS. So getting C2 for the purposes of ensuring every cast of your skill results in a crit might be beneficial to her. But realistically, none of the constellations are a must-have. Once again, she's a very simple character. If you get used to her playstyle, she's good. If you don't, she's bad. In totality, what I mostly like about Navia is how digestible she is. The mono Geo team can be pretty off-putting for most players, what with how you need specific units and specific things to be met. Alternatively, having Navia as an Unga Bunga DPS unit, for lack of a better term, can be refreshingly enjoyable. She's a fantastic pick if you need a brute force or something like a boss. In other words, she's a great autopilot character, and I for one love autopilot characters. There is a chance you might accidentally cast your skill before getting full stacks, but theoretically, her kit is engineered to be user-friendly enough for that to not happen. Remember, her burst gives you half the number of stacks. If you have Fischl or someone who can spam reactions quickly, she'll have no trouble accumulating the remaining 3. Furthermore, her simplicity makes her cheap to invest in. She's a brute force attacker, meaning she can use almost any weapon that gives high attack and crit stats. She can team up with any units that either get her stacks quickly or give her more damage, which means you can have a full team of 4-star supports. Beneficial and Charlotte can work, for instance. Navia has a pretty low investment floor, all things considered. I'm glad she's good. Many people are skeptical about her being viable on the basis of her element not doing her any favors, but she sort of bypasses that. As mentioned before, if not for the crystallized interaction, you'd be hard-pressed to even call her a Geo character in anything other than name only. But in kind of a roundabout fashion, Navia found a way for Geo's only reaction to actually be a good thing. The bonus damage on her elemental skill from crystallized shards effectively fills the void of Geo not having bonus damage. Since her skill can deal upwards of double damage at 3 stacks or more, Navia basically turns crystallized into an amplifying reaction. I still think they should revisit the Geo element and rework it as a whole though, maybe introduce a new reaction with Animo or Dendro to give it more flavor, or rework the crystallized reaction altogether, because every Geo unit hereafter has to sort of be overtuned, like how Navia is, for any of its units to be functional due to their element's reaction, or practically speaking lack thereof. Ultimately, I don't consider Navia the savior of Geo because to me she doesn't feel like a Geo character, she's a character who happens to be Geo. If in the near future they release a Geo Farazan or something along the lines of that, then I can definitely imagine Geo becoming more powerful, by extension making Navia stronger too, and she's already very strong. A solid character that's more than competitive with the game's current roster. Anyways, that's going to be it for today. If I had to give her a number rating out of 10, I would give her a solid 8.5 to 9 out of 10. Definitely someone you won't regret pulling for. Those of you who plan to pull for Navia, how far are you aiming to go? Are you just going to go C0 or 1, or are you going to wail for her C6? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you enjoyed the video, I encourage you to leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other character discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.